Hashem, the daf is dedicated for Shmir for the Chayalim Atzal for the Shviyim and Yeshua for Am Yisrael and the Seis Torah. So we learned yesterday in the Mishnah that there are certain disqualifications, and we're looking for the source of them. Certain things are disqualified when you serve in the temple. So the Bei Rabbi Shmuel Tana. So the Bei Rabbi Shmuel, we had discussed yesterday. How do we know a zar, a non-Kohen, is disqualified from serving in the temple? The Gemara cited a pasuk, Daber al Aaron and Banav Dina Drumi Kodshei Bnei Yisrael. And they divide the verse in the middle to say both that if Aaron and his children are tamei, they can't serve, and also Bnei Yisrael can the zar, a non-Kohen, cannot serve. But the Gemara is going to give other suggestions today for how a zar cannot serve. And the Bei Rabbi Shmuel Tana Asya b'Kal v'Chomer. So the Bei Rabbi Shmuel says we're going to learn it from a Kal v'Chomer, from a Baal Mum, from a Kohen who is a blemish. A Kohen who is a blemish is Kal. He's lighter. Every Kal v'Chomer goes from a lighter to a more severe. So the Kohen who's a Baal Mum is lighter. Why? She'ochel. He's able to serve, even though the Kohen is a blemish. Let's say he has the Rahman al-Atzlan, a broken limb. He's still able to eat from the food, the kodshim. But if he would serve his chilo, he would desecrate it. So a zar on top of tezayin and aleph, a non-Kohen she'eno ochel, he can't eat. He can't eat the kodshim. Eino din shemavachil. He's more chomer. He can't even eat it. So for sure, if he served, he would disqualify it. And the Gemara says that's not a kal v'chomer. Well, the Baal Mum is actually more chomer. Because Mala Baal Mum Shekein Asabo Karev Kamakriv. Baal Mum, the Karev is like there's a similar law between the animal that's brought and the one who brings it, that they're both disqualified by if they have a blemish. So don't bring a proof to me from a Baal Mum to a zar. So the Gemara says, well, Tamei Yochiach. Let's prove from a Kohen who's Tamei that he can't eat. Mala Tamei Shekein. So don't bring proof to, and he'll also disqualify. So the Gemara says, no, don't bring a proof to me. It's not really clear to me why a tamei is considered kal me'azar, but anyway, that's the Gemara's assumption. The Gemara says bring it from a tamei. Tamei mal tamei shekame tamei. So no, the Kohen is different. The tamei is also more severe because it can be mitamei others. So the Gemara says something that you should get used to in this in the Masech. We've had a few times, and we're going to have it many more times. So we look for the common denominator of two laws. What's the common denominator? Both the Baal Mum and the person is tummy. Shemus Haran, they're both not allowed to serve. Vim Avdo, and if they would serve, they'll disqualify it. Afani Avizar, I'll bring in the non-Kohen, Shum Musar, he's not allowed to serve. Vim Avad, and if he would serve, he'll disqualify. Gemara says, wait, where do you get that assumption? Mino and the Musar. How do we know that a non-Kohen is warned that he's not allowed to serve? We know he's disqualified. You're trying to prove he's disqualified, but your assumption is that he's warned that he's not allowed to serve. There needs to be two things in the Torah: a warning and then a disqualification. So how do we know he's warned not to serve? So the Gemara tells us, if you want to say it's from the pasuk of speak that we said, if that's your source, well then, if you're going to look at that source as telling us that a non-Kohen can't serve, as taking the Chiddush reading of it that refers to a non-Kohen, well, that source also says the verse about disqualification, and you wouldn't need to learn it from a combination of the Baal Mum and the Tamei. So therefore, it's from a different pasuk. That the non-Kohen cannot come close to you. So the Gemara says, but that too, equal mifrach, we can break that. We can break that proof, that logic. Why? By saying the zar has actually something which separates it from the other two, from the Baal Mum and the Tamei. Baal Mum and the Tamei are both not allowed to serve on a bama. Do they teach you what a bama is? People know what a bama is? Excellent, Yossi. Very good. Whoever's paying your tuition should be very proud. That a bama, that before the temple, the base of Mikdash was built, the Jewish people were allowed to bring karbanos on a bama. These are like private altars that they would build, let's say, in their backyard. They could build it in their backyard in Efrat. They put up a bama and go ahead and serve it. But there were still laws. So a non-Kohen was allowed to serve. As we know from Tanakh, like Rashi says, Gidon served, and Manoach, the father of Shimshon served, and Shmuel Hanavi served, and he was a Levi. So, so, but a Balmum and a Tame cannot serve. So you can't bring a proof from a Balmum and a Tame to a Zar. The Gemara says, okay, lo tema tame yochiach el ema onen yochiach. So don't say that tame will prove it. So drop the example from tama and say that an onen. What's an onen? Rahman al the day of a death, person until the body's buried, he's prohibited to do positive commandments, and he cannot serve in the temple. The Gemara says, don't bring me a proof from onen because that has the severity. Mal onen shekain aser b'maiser. The onen has a. You need a Gemara, Meyer? Here's a Gemara right there. Here, Mala Onin, and Onin has an extra law. Shekain Oser b'Maiser, and Onin is not allowed to eat the Maiser Sheni. How do we know that the Onin can't eat the Maiser Sheni? Because it says in the Torah, it says Lo Achalti B'Oni. He says I don't eat it in my state of ritual, in my state of Aninus. So then Gemara says, okay, Baal Mum Yochia. Go back to the Baal Mum. Chazer Din Lo Rizek Rizeh Lo Rizek Rizeh Tzad Hashav Shaban Shemusarin. The Gemara says, but no, again, you can't prove from the Baal Mum and the Onain because we could break that attempt to logic because we say, also the Onain can't serve on the Bama. So therefore, you can't prove from a Baal Mum and an Onain to a Zar. The Gemara says, whoa, what's your proof for that? How do you know that the Onan can't serve in the Bama? Dilma Shari Bama. Maybe he can serve. So he suggests that. And if the Onan could serve in the Bama, then indeed the source that a Zar can disqualifies comes from the combination of an Onan and a Baal Mum. But not everybody's willing to accept that. So Rav Mishar Shia Amar Asya Kavachomer Miyoshev. Take out an Onan and put in a logical argument from one who sits. One is not allowed to serve in the temple while sitting. My Yoshev Sha'ochel, just like a Yoshev, who's allowed to eat he's allowed to eat while sitting. Which karbonos? Those karbonos that are not in the kodesh, that are not kodesh kodesh, but like a bechor, he's allowed to eat while sitting. Im ava, but if he serves in the temple while sitting, chilel, he'll disqualify. Dar she'eno ochel, a non-kohen who cannot eat the kodesh kodesh, eno din shem avad chilel. For sure, if he will serve, he will disqualify. What can he eat while sitting, which is different than a Zar? Tosfos gives an example of firstborn animal, but actually a Zar can eat the firstborn animal. It has to be given to the Kohen, but the Zar can eat it. So it's a little bit of a question. What exactly is he being, is it referring to? There's the Agos, they amend the text on the side, they give another answer. I'm told they amend it to say, it's talking about that maybe for the purpose of kodesh kodeshim you could eat, maybe you could sit. It's a big question. What's the Gemara referring to? But we'll leave that aside. But the Gemara says, no, don't bring me a proof. You can't bring me a proof from a Kal V'chomer from Yoshev Shekem Pasol Le'edus, because the person who's sitting is not able to testify. So therefore, since he's not able to testify, therefore he's more chamor than the Zar. He's more strict. So the Gemara says, no, Yoshev Talmud Chacham, a Torah scholar, sits while he testifies, so he can sit, so he's not more chamor. Yeah, by the way, what about an American law? Do you sit or you stand when you testify? Typically sit, but can you stand? Probably, yeah. The judge could tell you to stand. But what about Jewish law today? Do you sit or stand in the bedroom? So here, there was a period of time when they said even the Torah scholars have to sit, but now some say you have to stand. So it's, I think the practice is that everybody sits today in the Bezdin. But okay. The Gemara says, no, don't bring me a proof from a Yoshev Talmud Chacham. That doesn't prove the exception because of shame, malice shame Yoshev. The general concept of testimony is done while standing, not sitting. And so therefore, you can't bring a proof, Shekem Pasol Edis. So you can't bring a proof to Zar because it's more severe. Mara says, Shem Yoshev will parach. No, don't bring that because we have cases where he's sitting. Don't bring from the general thing. Im Tamom or parach. If you're going to say that we do have that, so Asya mi Yoshev u'michada mihanach, and prove it by combining Yoshev with one of the others. The Gemara says, "V'yoshev the kasher b'bama minon." How do we know that you could serve in the in the bamos while sitting? Amar Kro ha'mod ufnei Hashem l'sharto. It says that you stand before God to serve Him with Nei Hashem v'lo ufnei bama, meaning to stay in the temple. You need to be standing while serving, but not on the bamos. Okay, so now the next idea, onain. How do we know an onain is disqualified from serving in the temple? What's an onain? An onain is the person who's a direct mourner before the body is buried, and he's not allowed to serve in the temple. Last time I took Elal, he's not allowed to do positive commandments. Last time I took Elal, they had on their, like, the plane, whatever it's called, the screen, they give you Hilchos Aninos. And they know a lot of people, they travel to Israel when they're in Onain, and they can't, what are they supposed to do on the plane? They're not going to watch a movie while they're in Onain. They're not going to study Torah because they have Elal and Daf Yomi. So what are they going to do? They can only study laws of Aninos, so they know how to be laws of mourning, so they know how to do it properly.
It's on the screen where you see movies.
You have a choice. You don't have to see a movie. You could study laws of Aninos. Yeah. So the Gemara says, "Minoa." And how do we know that Onain is disqualified from serving in the temple? It says about the Kohen Gadol that he's not allowed to leave the temple, and if he does and he should not disqualify. Means, say the Kohen Gadol serves in a state of Aninos. So it proves from here, from this point, but a regular Kohen, if he didn't leave, he would disqualify. He says in the sources from here. There was a tense conversation between Moshe and Aaron after Nadav and Avihu died, and they brought the goat of Rosh Chodesh on the first day, B'Yom HaShmini. That day, after the death of Nadav and Avihu, they had to bring the goat for Rosh Chodesh. So that goat was burnt. And so Moshe turned to Aaron and he wanted to know why it was burnt. Now, this is actually the middle point of the Torah, because the Psukim are Darosh Darash. Moshe was looking for it. And the word Darosh is written on the end of one line of the Torah, and the next word Darosh is written at the beginning of the line. And that is the middle point in words. So he says, so Rabbi Elazar Amar Mehacha, it says that Aaron responded, do you think they brought it, which would have been disqualified because they're an onin? Heini krivu aniya krafti. I was the one who brought it, which implies Mikal the Inu Akriv, that if Elazar and Itamar, Aaron's other sons, had brought it, Shapir Starf, it would have been properly burnt. Rabbi Elazar, so that proves that they're disqualified. Rabbi Elazar by time Amar Mivin Mikdash Yetze. Why doesn't he cite the first pasuk? It says the Kohen Gadol cannot leave, but it doesn't say that if a Kohen serves that he's disqualifying. You inferred it, but it didn't say it. And why does the Tanna Kama here does not cite the same source that Rabbi Elazar cites, meaning Heini Krivu? He says, we're going to get to this, God willing, on Daf Bezos Hashem Yisbarach on Daf Kluf Aleph. And Kluf Aleph, we're going to see two theories about why this carbon, this goat of Rosh Chodesh was burnt. One is because Aaron was in Aninos, and so he could do the avoda but not eat it. And the other was because it was tamei. The first position here is like the one that says it was burnt not because of Aninos but because of Tama. Be'er Yishmael Tana, he gives a different source for how we know Aninos is disqualifying. Asya B'Kal Chomer Balmum. He learned it out from Blemish Kohen. Ma Balmum on top of Tezayin Amarav Sha'ochel. It's like a Balmum who's allowed to eat, so he's kal im avad if he serves. Klila will disqualify. Onain she'ein ochel, and onain who's not allowed an onain who's not allowed to eat. For sure, he'll serve, he'll disqualify. Don't bring me a proof from that. Malabamum. Need to go? Yes. Okay, fine. Malabamum shekain asabo craven kamak craven. Don't bring a proof to me from Balmum, because the Balmum has this combination that it has a similar law to the animal that they're both disqualified. So Zar Yochel, prove it from a non-Kohen. But don't prove it to me from a non-Kohen. Malazar shekain elo takana. The non-Kohen can never be fixed, whereas an onin could eventually serve again. So Balmum Yochiach. V'chazor din lo rizek. What's the tzad of Shava Shaban? She'in musharin The common denominator is they're both warned that they can't serve, and if they're served, they'll disqualify. So I also include the onin that he's warned, and if he serves, he'll disqualify. The Gemara says, well, how do we know that an onin? Where's an onin warned that he can't serve? If you want to say that's from that verse, the first opinion on the bottom of Tezayin Amabeis, well, there it says it's specifically disqualified, and you don't need this common denominator at all. It's from the second possibility of what Rebbe Lezer said, that Aaron says, did they bring it? I brought it, because Savar Mipnei Aninos Nisrafa. And it's on the position that it was burnt because he was an onain, because Savar Mipnei Aninos Nisrafa. Were you thinking that they brought it and they would have been burnt if they brought it because of Aninus? So that proves that there's a warning against Aninus. So the Gemara says, well, Iko Mifrach, no, you could challenge that. You can't bring a common denominator from a Baal Mum and a Zar, because there's never a case where anyone like that can serve. That means Shekin Lo Hutru Miklo. There's no one in that general category is ever allowed. Whereas by an Onain, there is an exception. And what's the exception? That's the Kohen Gadol could serve while he's in an Aninus. So the Gemara says, okay, so Tameh, add in Tuma, that where there is an exception, because if the whole community is Tameh, you can serve. The Gemara says, well, Malo Tameh Shekei Tameh. Don't bring in proof from Tuma, because he can make others Tameh, so he's more severe. So Hanach Yachichu. Go back to the other two. That they're warned and they don't serve. Also, the onain is warned they can't serve. The Gemara says, we could break them out. No, so the Tuma, you can't bring a proof from the Tuma because you say there's an exception, but there's no exception by an individual. The Kohen Gadol is the individual who can do it. There's only an exception by the community. Where it says shame Tuma Mia Isra. Yeah, but there's still an example. Have an amazing day at the Shekoyach. There's still an example of where Tuma is allowed. And that's by a community. So therefore you can prove it. Have a great day, Eric. Shkoyach. He says, no, we're going to learn that from the case of Yoshev. From Yoshev to an onain. The Gemara says, don't bring a proof from Yoshev, because my Yoshev she'ochel. So he says, we'll learn that from Kavachomer Yoshev. My Yoshev she'ochel avechilo. Just like the Yoshev, he's allowed to eat, and if he eats, he'll disqualify it. Onain she'eno ochel, an onain who's not allowed to eat. For sure, if he'll eat, he'll disqualify. But don't bring a proof from Yoshev. Why? Mal Yoshev shecame pasal edus. Yoshev is disqualified as a witness, so you can't bring a proof from a Yoshev to an onaid. So the Gemara goes back. Yoshev Talmud Chacham, proving that from Yoshev, who's a Torah scholar who's able to sit while he testifies. Mal Shem Yoshev came pasal edus. Well, yeah, but the concept of Yoshev in general is disqualified. Shem Yoshev will parach. No, don't ask me about Shem Yoshev in general, because there's still an exception. Or else combine Yoshev and one of the others. Says the Gemara, an onain is disqualified if he does the service, but Amar Rabba will shanu al b'karban yachad. When does an onain disqualify? By an individual offering of a b'karban sibur, but by a communal offering, mirata. By a communal offering, then the onain service is going to be okay. The carbon is okay. You don't need to bring another. What's the source for this idea? From Tuma. Just like there's never an exception for Tuma. It's a Kohen Gadol, Kohen Yachad. But by a Kohen Gadol, by a Kohen Yachad, it is not allowed. But there is Tuma that's allowed by a communal offering. Aninas, which is allowed by a Kohen Gadol, by a Kohen Yachad. For sure it should be allowed by a Kohen Hedge, by a Korban Sibur Aninos. So Maska for Rava Barilah, no, Rava Barilah challenges this. First of all, he says, I don't accept your assumptions. Hey, Lotusar Aninos Eitzel. He says, first of all, Lotusar Aninos Eitzel Kohen Gadol Kohen Yachad. First of all, he says you shouldn't even allow aninos by a Kohen Gadol, by an individual, mikal v'chomer, and from a logical argument, mad tuma shehutrei till Kohen hedger, just like tuma which is allowed by a regular Kohen by community, but Tzibur Hutra Eitzel Kohen Gadol Karban Yachid is not allowed by Kohen Gadol by an individual. Aninos Shelo Hutra Eitzel Kohen Hedgev Karban Tzibur. Aninos, which is not allowed by Kohen Hedgev by a communal offering. Eno Din Shelo Tutar Eitzel Kohen Gadol by Karban Yachid. For sure, it should not be allowed by Kohen Gadol by Karban Yachid. So we challenge the first assumption. The second assumption is also challenged. V'tusar Tuma Eitzel Kohen Gadol by Karban Yachid, and furthermore, Tuma should be allowed by a Kohen Gadol by an individual offering Mikal v'chomer from Mikal v'chomer. Ma Ninos Shelo Hutra Eitzel Kohen Hedgev by Karban Tzibur, just like a Ninos, which is not allowed by a regular Kohen by a communal offering. Hutra Eitzel Kohen Gadol by Karban Yachid is allowed by a Kohen Gadol by an individual. Tuma Shel Hutra Eitzel Kohen Hedgev by Karban Tzibur. Tuma, which is allowed by a regular Kohen by a communal offering. Eno Dun Shel Hutra Eitzel Kohen Gadol by Karban Yachid for sure should be allowed by a Kohen Gadol by an individual offering. And our third assumption, which we challenge, is Lo Tusar Tuma Eitzel Kohen Hedgev by Karban Tzibur. The third assumption that we challenge is that Tuma should not be allowed by a regular Kohen by communal offering. Mikal v'chomer. Again, Ma Ninos Shel Hutra Eitzel Kohen Gadol by Karban Yachid, just like a Ninos, which is allowed by a Kohen Gadol by an individual, Hutra Eitzel Kohen Hedgev by Karban Tzibur, not allowed in the community by the Kohen. Tuma Shelo Hutra Eitzel Kohen Gadol by Karban Yachid. Tuma that is not allowed by Kohen Gadol by an individual offering. Eno Din Shelo Tutzar Kohen Hedgev by Karban Tzibur should not be allowed by the Karban Tzibur. So basically, all your assumptions we could challenge from Mikal v'chomer, and the Gemara has a simon to remember. Lo Tusar Aninos v'Tuma Yachid Yachid Tzibur Siman. Ella Iko Mefrach Hachi Iko Mefrach Hachi. So you can take this Kal v'chomer and go in either direction, and therefore Kol Chada v'Chada Teiku B'Duchte. And so therefore each one you establish it in its place. Each one of them will remain in its place. That when the Torah says, basically, like when the Torah says there's a ninos for a Kohen Gadol, that's allowed both by individual and by communal offering. And when the Torah says the Kohen Hedgev is prohibited by a ninos, it's both in both places, both by individual and even by community. So we don't accept that chiddush. And when Tumah is allowed, it's by a communal offering, even by a regular Kohen, and when it's prohibited by an individual offering, it's also prohibited by a Kohen Gadol, and we don't learn out this Kal v'chomer to change any of these laws. Okay, this is today's daf. We'll stop. Baruch Hashem.